Let's start then with that decision. Why choose the UK?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me. 3 reasons. First, talent. The UK is a world-class destination for AI talent. Brilliant universities, fantastic people coming out of those, but also a magnet for global talent, and I think really only second to the US. Second is this evolving, as you mentioned, approach to AI regulation. I think the direction of travel there is very promising. And third, for us, actually, this is really a natural evolution. It's a well-kept secret, but we've had a very large presence here in the UK for over a decade, nearly 1,000 engineers based here, and we do much of the core research and development for our other software here in the UK.
Louis, there has been quite a lot of pushback, right, for some of the contracts that you've been trying to get for NHS, and, doctors being worried that it's a private company managing some of the infrastructure and what you do with the data. What kind of assurances would you give today to people working in services that are worried about how their data is used?
So I think those are very legitimate concerns. Anything that touches patient data in the NHS needs a lot of scrutiny. But I think a lot of the concern around us specifically stems from a misunderstanding about our business model. We are not interested in the economic sense in the NHS's data. We're interested in their business. Unlike other tech companies, we don't monetize data. Our business model is licensing our software to help large, complex organizations to make better use of the data they already lawfully control.
You're in the process of bidding for about a £400 million contract. I know you don't want to get into the details of that bidding process, but can you just give us a sense as to your level of confidence as to whether or not that's going to fall to Palantir? Can you give us a nod as to how you feel about that process?
I'm really sorry, Tom. I can't comment on ongoing procurement processes.
OK. In terms of the NHS stuff, and then we'll move on to what's happening in terms of defence, but there is this view, and you hear this from Peter Thiel, of course, one of your co-founders, saying that there's kind of a UK Stockholm syndrome around the NHS. There's been Bloomberg reporting around some emails from you talking about buying your way into the NHS. There's a view amongst some, rightly or wrongly, that Palantir is a bit of a predator. How do you kind of counteract that above and beyond what you've just said around the needs to put in place the right controls and the fact that you're not holding onto this data?
Yeah, I would counter that very firmly. Okay. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we have done with the NHS. Our software has enabled them to deliver PPE during the COVID crisis, to deliver the vaccinations to all of us here in the UK. And at the moment, we're helping them reduce waiting lists, which, as you know, is the major challenge that the healthcare system is facing.
Louis, do you worry about AI? I mean, some of your tech is so powerful, and this is something that we've been trying to explore, that actually, if it's in the wrong hands, it could really damage national security.
These are very legitimate concerns, and I'm very glad that the UK is taking a lead on this question. I think it's all about finding that balance between safety and innovation and experimentation. The challenge is finding that balance.
Are you talking to the Prime Minister and his team? Are you having close contact with the government about how to build out those guardrails? To what extent are they consulting you on this?
So I think the very exciting thing about the direction of travel that they're taking is this non-statutory, broad cross-sectoral principles, but then the regulation itself happening in the context-specific domain. So if you take, for example, medicines, drug discovery, the application of AI there will be very different to the application of AI in, say, autonomous vehicles. So you want the individual regulatory body in that domain to take the lead.
But how do you know who you're selling it to and what they use it for?
Well, this is where I think it's so important to have that body of law that exists here in the UK, world-class courts, world-class regulators, and they take the lead on what's happening in their specific domain.
Talk to us. You've been really consequential in terms of your partnership with the Ukrainians in that really important defence of their nation. You've been offering the services around on the battlefield, but also imagery in terms of satellite imagery, but also helping things like building out a case for war crimes and targeting the Russians on that front. Are you expanding the scope of your relationship with Ukraine? Are there more services you can offer? And do you need the financial backing of Europe, of NATO, of the US to expand that opportunity?
Well, of course, Tom, that's a very topical question today as the Ukraine Recovery Conference kicks off in London. Yeah. The Ukrainian Prime Minister and many senior figures from across the world are here to discuss precisely that question of how do we start to think about recovery and reconstruction in Ukraine. And, I would just argue that to win a war, you need a strong economy. And so it's very important to help the Ukrainians figure out how they can, at the same time, start to rebuild transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, those prerequisites to economic recovery.
You expect to have a role to play in that and on that front?
I would hope we will. I would very much hope we will.
Is there a part of an AI tech that you think shouldn't touch an economy or defense or national security? We're still trying to figure out exactly how this changes all of our world, from how we search Google and algorithm and things like that to actually what it means for the national defense.
So I think it's a fast emerging sector, as you said, and in that context, I think it would be foolish to try and predict where we might be in 2 or 3 years' time. I mean, the obsolescence of what's being built is almost day by day.
Are there some technologies that you're developing? I mean, Alex Karp, your CEO, suggested that there's something so powerful that they wouldn't want to release them to certain customers. Are you holding back on some of the products that you've been developing? And will you be how much of a fence will you put around some of these products when you're focused on some customers? Are some customers going to be denied some of these abilities because you're concerned about how they're going to be used?
It's always been our approach from the inception of Palantir. We've had very clear red lines about who we'll work with and who we won't. So, for example, we have never worked with adversarial nations like China or Russia.
Okay.
And that will continue? I mean,
And
I imagine that continue.
absolutely.
How difficult is it? And again, how difficult is it to actually track who it sells to? Like, if you sell technology to a friendly nation, but then this goes elsewhere, I mean, can you actually track it?
Yes.
How do you track it?
Well, we track who's using our software, where it's being used. So there's a technological dimension, there's a contractual dimension.
Back to the defence part. NATO has its own venture capital fund it's setting up, so it's going to be investing in some key technologies. Are you working with NATO directly? Are you expecting to get further contracts from NATO? And what does the spending in Europe, the ramped-up defence spending, mean for your prospects in Europe?
Well, I think we've been in Ukraine, as you know, for the last 18 months, and I think that's opened the eyes, not just of Europe, but the wider world, to where there might be gaps in military capability. People have seen what works on the battlefield and what doesn't, and clearly that has opened a great deal of opportunity for us around the world.
I mean, does that mean that policymakers in Berlin and elsewhere kind of tapping you on the shoulder saying, maybe it's about time we worked with you at a deeper level if we're not already? Are you getting that sense?
We are, yes.
OK, so contracts are going to be coming from Europe as a result of this?
I don't want to make any predictions, but the conversation's alive.
But you'll speak to us first when they do. Thank you,
Of course.